Never stray your blade against the flesh of an innocent person if they like the video. Hide in plain sight with the bell on. Never compromise the brotherhood. Subscribe to the channel. And when others blindly follow the truth and are limited by the law, remember, nothing is true. Everything is permitted. Legend of the gaming industry. Icon of teenagers and adults in 2007. A game that philosophically inspired millions of people to run and climb garages. One of the biggest franchises in the history of the gaming world with 12 main parts, a bunch of spin-offs, DLCs, books, comics, movies, and even a TV series. All of this is Assassin's Creed. The release of the 13th part of the series is just around the corner. Will it add something new to the status of a legendary game series? Will Ubisoft become another machine for extracting money from fans? Did the developers remember why fans fell in love with the Assassin's Creed series? To answer these questions, we'll connect the Animus and dive into the pre-creation of the first part of Assassin's Creed, and follow the series' path from a frenzied rise to a fall? You're watching PressX. Check if there's something sharp and metallic in your back. If not, we'll get started. The history of the legendary Assassin's Creed series of games originates from the equally legendary Prince of Persia franchise, and it all started at the end of 2003 with Patrice Desilet, a 29-year-old game designer in the prime of his life, finished work on the legendary game Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, working not as anyone but as the creative director of the project. The Prince of Persia we know now wouldn't be like this without Desilet's past work. Disney's Donald Duck going quackers in 2000. Patrice Desilet is generally a very extravagant person for the pragmatic and systematic world of the gaming industry. After all, most people come to game development from specialized institutes where they boned up tons of text about computer technologies and learned programming languages. For example, like the famous trio of Blizzard Entertainment, Alan Adam, Michael Morheim, and Frank Pierce, who studied at the same technical university. Or the creators of Magicka and Helldivers from Arrowhead Game Studios. At the same time, the future father of the Assassin's Creed series, Patrice Desilet, dreamed of becoming an actor from childhood. At the age of 16, he entered the Collège Édouard Montpetit in Quebec, Canada, where Desilet found a book about the Middle Ages and the Knights Templar on a dusty library shelf. This book tells about the mysterious rituals of the order, mystical artifacts, and countless treasures. So as you can guess, these stories influence the imagination of 16-year-old Patrice. This will lead to the creation of Assassin's Creed in the future. Patrice's dreams of Hollywood and the Academy Award for Best Actor quickly faded. After all, one school day, the young man realized that he was just wasting his time, and he was surrounded by people much more talented than him. However, despite this, Patrice still did not dare to drop out of school and finally end the film industry. Shortly after graduating college, he entered the film industry of Montreal, where at the age of 22 he received a bachelor's degree in directing. It was at this time, from 1996 to 1998, that the not-so-large and not quite successful company without big titles, Ubisoft, began to expand. In 1996, the company opened its new studios in the French town of Annecy, Shanghai, and Milan. But the most important thing for our history was the new studio in Montreal, where it was at this time that Patrice Desilet finished his studies. The opening of new studios meant a large number of new jobs, including for young Montreal residents. So, without thinking twice,
Not exactly sure what you mean. We've already offered you a position.
Nobody in this town works without a retainer, guys. You think you can find somebody who does? We tell you have my blessing. But I think we all know that person's not going to represent you as well as I can.
Will our offer...
But what is known for sure is that on July 2nd, 1997, Desilet joined Ubisoft Montreal. And since Ubisoft Montreal was just entering the gaming market, largely supported by the Montreal City Council and the Government of Canada, Ubisoft's initial products were narrow-profile projects for children, arcade games, and educational programs. So, in 1999, Ubisoft Montreal released the game Speedbusters, in which the name of Patrice Desilet stood opposite the position of game designer. The first racing game directed by Patrice Desilet was based on the 1935 film Speed Devils, but with dinosaurs and UFOs? Speedbusters received quite good reviews. Journalist Nick Smith from the publication All Game gave Speedbusters 3.5 stars out of 5, noting that you can get pleasure from the game only if the player has a high-quality video card. But the Metacritic website gave the game 78 points out of 100, which meant a very good result for Desilet's first attempts as a game designer. But grades aren't the most important thing. What is important, Desilet was able to prove that the company can rely on him and give him the opportunity to create games further. Thus, in 1999, the adventure game Hype, The Time Quest, was released from the pen of Desilet. The plot revolves around Hype, a 22-year-old knight in the service of King Taskin IV. The hero goes on a journey through time to save the kingdom from the evil Black Knight, Barnack. The game receives no less positive reviews from critics for Patrice's previous project, receiving an overall rating from IGN, GameZone, and GamePro publications of 7.6 points out of 10. Finally, in 2000, the third project under the direction of Patrice Desilet was released, the arcade game Donald Duck Goin' Quackers. The gameplay of the game was very simple and consisted of the player overcoming various obstacles and enemies and 24 levels and warp rooms, at the end of which there were bosses. In general, the game was very similar to Crash Bandicoot, given that it worked on the same principle, and that's exactly what it was criticized for. And yet, Donald Duck Goin' Quackers was not a failure for Desilet. So Desilet spent 3 years working for Ubisoft Montreal. The developer was well versed in creating games and was already ready for something more serious. And this serious project was the continuation of the legendary franchise of games Prince of Persia called The Sands of Time, in which Patrice became the game's creative director. We talked about this in more detail in our video dedicated to the history of the creation of the cult series Prince of Persia, a link to which you can find in the right corner of the screen. The story of the prince's creation is very interesting, especially for further immersion in the world of Assassins. Therefore, we strongly advise you to watch this video. But for now, we're moving on.
We're here in Montreal at Ubisoft, and I'm Patrice Desilet, the creative director of Assassin's Creed. We're gonna go with the team and show you what we're doing. So hope you enjoy it. Come on.
Indeed, the history of the creation of Assassin's Creed is quite closely connected with the series Prince of Persia. After all, it was the triumph of Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time, that Ubisoft was able to attract a more adult and mature audience of fans to its games than a children's one. The Ubisoft development team that worked on it was also able to grab a little of the fame and success of Prince of Persia. In particular, Yannis Mallat, who was the main producer of Sands of Time and who actually took the first step towards reviving the series, as well as the game's art director Raphael Lacoste, animation director Alex Trun, level designer David Chateauneuf, and the game's chief technical director Claude Langlais. Of course, without the father of the Prince of Persia, the team would not have done well. And we're not talking about the Persian Sultan right now, but about Jordan Mechner. But today it's not about him. So, for the management of Ubisoft, it was absolutely logical to immediately start developing the next Prince of Persia, which should be released on a new generation of consoles. Who do you think they decided to appoint as the creative director of the project? That's right, Patrice Desilet. Once in an interview, he recalled the times when he completed work on Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time. I come back from vacation, Christmas holidays, and I'm asking, okay, so what's next? And I was told, let's do a Prince of Persia, but for the next generation of consoles. So in 2004, January, we don't know what the new consoles will be, right? We have no clue that the PS3 will be a PS3 and the 360 will exist. And I received a mandate. So, it's like Prince of Persia, next generation, but try to redefine the action-adventure genre into the next generation of platforms. This was a difficult task. It's not surprising that the first months of work were not very productive. After all, the team and Desilet himself could not understand what the basic concept of the new game should be, and also what the new story should be about. Patrice did not want to continue the story about the Persian prince and his companion. As is often the case, an accident came to Desilet's aid. Once, Patrice came across a novel by Slovenian writer Vladimir Bartol, Alamut, in 1938. The book describes the life story of Hassan-i Sabah, a religious and military leader between 1090 and 1124 who completely monopolized secular and spiritual power at that time. He was the founder of the Nizari Ismaili, a sect that became widely known as the Hashashin, or Order of Assassins. And the people, they were all called assassins, who, on Sabah's command, killed political and religious enemies of the order. In parallel with his role as a formidable leader, Sabah was a scholar of the mathematics. He was particularly well versed in geometry as well as astronomy, philosophy, and epistemology. In Western culture, Sebach became known as Old Man of the Mountain. The name was given to him by Marco Polo. In one of his works, the Venetian explorer mentioned the mountain castle of Alamut, which was owned by the Order of Assassins, led by an old man of the mountain. This story fascinated Desilet and gave rise to the idea in his head. What if the main character is not a prince, but an assassin? During the year at the stage of preparing the new Prince, the upcoming game was called Prince of Persia Assassin. Its concept was that the player, leading a group of assassins, had to save the little Prince of Persia and then accompany him to a safe place all the way to Jerusalem. The future game was also supposed to be many times larger than the Sands of Time, have a completely open world, a bunch of NPCs, and new locations. But to do this, developers needed to make a completely new engine for the next generation of consoles. Subsequently, this will play an unpleasant role in the production of the game. However, this is exactly the concept of the new Prince of Persia Desilet presented to the management of Ubisoft. But no matter how impressive it may look in the view of Desilet, Ubisoft refused such a continuation of the Prince. The studio executives literally said, quote, "This is not what we want. We still need the Prince." Desilet, on the other hand, believed that he and his team had invented something better than just the Prince of Persia. "We will make a cool killer with a hidden blade, next to which will be the Prince of Persia," he told the management. And after this heated conversation, Patrice Desilet and the first development team of the Sands of Time, guess what they did? They left the project due to a misunderstanding with the management of Ubisoft. The team failed to persuade the management. Ubisoft still had something to add to its game library. Therefore, Desilet and his incredible idea were given complete creative freedom, but on the condition that he doesn't spend a lot of money. This could already be considered a small victory. But before the upcoming Assassin's Saga production, there were significant changes in the development team. From the main core of the team, only Desilet himself, Raphael Lecoste, Alex Drouin, David Chateauneuf, and Claude Langlais remained in their positions. The team's chief producer, Yanis Mallet, was transferred by Ubisoft to the development team for the real sequel to the Prince series, which was called Prince of Persia: Warrior Within. But we'll talk about this in a separate video. And for the upcoming Assassin's Creed, Jade Raymond was appointed to the post of producer. Joking aside, before joining Ubisoft, Jade Raymond participated in the McGill University Computer Research Program. After graduating from college, she worked at Sony as a game programmer and participated in the creation of the first research group in the company's online division. Even later, she managed to work at Electronic Arts as a producer of The Sims Online. Corey G. May, the game's new screenwriter, also joined the team. He previously trained as a screenwriter at Disney and then worked as an assistant screenwriter for director Guillermo del Toro. The lead programmer of the game was Matthew Massaroli, and Nicholas Canton was appointed responsible for the cinematics of the game. The main composer of the game was Jesper Jacobsen Kiet, who previously wrote soundtracks for such well-known games at that time as MDK2, Hitman, Codename 47, and Hitman 2, Silent Assassin. Thus, all the roles within the team were assigned. In 2004, the development team for Assassin's Creed was already gearing up for a complex and painstaking yet highly ambitious project. It's one thing to say you're going to create an ambitious game that redefines the adventure genre, but it's quite another thing to create one. Putting all the ideas together, Desilet and his new team formulated the key principles of their concept. It will be an open world with crowds, free movement, cool archaic killers, a naturalistic city, and realistic animation. At the same time, among these ideas, the main concept of the Prince of Persia remained. There were acrobatic tricks and parkour. Desilet recalls, "I remember just, going back to everything I wanted to do in the Sands of Time that I couldn't do, and I wanted a crowd. I wanted that palace to be lived in, but we could only draw 8 characters at the same time on the screen because we only had 32 megabytes of RAM on the PlayStation 2, so all my ideas were kicked into the long grass." Therefore, with the new generation of Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 consoles with their insane amount of RAM at that time, of 256 megabytes, Desilet and the team had a whole universe of opportunities to implement their ideas. Developers from different parts of the world could only dream of such opportunities before, but no matter how enticing these dreams were, there was always one big but standing in the way. To make full use of 256 megabytes of memory, the team needed a completely new game engine, and creating it was still a challenge. At that time, the game industry had no engines capable of supporting large-scale sandboxes. games where players could explore the entire world freely and interact with almost any object without restrictions. Therefore, for technical directors Claude Langlais and Mathieu Mazzaroli, this was the first serious challenge. After all, creating a new intellectual property, or IP, a new engine and a new game world at the same time was on the verge of fantasy, and the icing on the cake was the fact that none of the developments could be tested in any way. It was mid-2004. The first Xbox was released only in 2005, and the new PlayStation, in general, only appeared at the end of 2006. Therefore, in fact, initially, Assassin's Creed was developed exclusively on paper for some time.
It's a key.
No, much more better. It is a drawing of a key.
So, over the next 2 years, Langlais and Mazzaroli will develop an engine called Scimitar. It will be the basis for the Anvil engine in future games of the Assassin's Creed series. At that time, the rest of the team had 2 whole years to come up with a plot, characters, create realistic designs, and animations. Let's start with the main one, the new main character. It took Desilet almost 3 years, from the moment he brought the idea of a new prince to Ubisoft, to finally decide on the image of the main character. You're probably wondering, why is it taking so long? First of all, because for a long time, Desilet could not make sure that the new assassin prince is a unique hero in the world of video games. After all, before that, the hero of Prince of Persia also owned weapons no worse than some assassins, was agile, strong, and could run on walls. Desilet wanted to avoid the feeling that the player had already seen this, that he was just playing for a disguised and less titled prince. He wanted the assassin to give the player a new and unique gaming experience. Desilet recalls, "For me, video game characters are a mask for role-playing games. In general, in modern games, you don't pay much attention to the character, and more often you struggle with the control scheme, or the hero of the game does something that the player has nothing to do with. We wanted to make the new assassin close to a real person, not someone imaginary, under a mask that the player could fully immerse themselves in the game's universe." Desilet only needed to understand what kind of mask the players will wear and whose life they will live. Some historical facts about what clothes and weapons the Hashashins wore were not enough for Desilet. It didn't say much about what kind of people they really were or what their characters were like. Then Desilet decided to go the other way. He asked himself a very stupid question at first glance. Quote, "And if the character of the game was an animal, who would he be?" Bingo. In Desilet's head, the assassin became a bird of prey. Patrice envisioned a menacing eagle soaring above everyone, seeing everything with deadly claws ready to swoop down and strike at any moment. So, from the image of the eagle, the main character of the first part of the game had a name, Altair, which means flying in Persian. However, Desilet did not do without one image. The question was how to breathe life into the assassin of the 12th century AD so that it does not look like a simple fantasy of the developers, and it reminded players of a real person of that time, with its own unique behavior and special movements. When Desilet first conceived the idea, he recalled acting lessons from university where he learned that physical movements are key to an actor's emotional memory. An actor doesn't always need to express the character and emotions through speech, they can do so through movement and physical behavior. The new assassin needed to communicate his identity and purpose through his entire body, whether it was pushing through a crowd, stealthily attacking passers-by, or blending quietly into the townspeople. Desilet didn't want Altair to be an acrobat like the Prince of Persia, and he didn't have to be a skilled ninja either. Altair needed to have a slightly rough and heavy presence. After all, adhering to realism, not everyone can freely and without obstacles jump on roofs. You need a lot of physical training. And you won't believe who became the reference for Altair. Put the video on pause and think about it. And if you don't guess correctly, then you just have to like this video. Ready? The basis for Altair's plastic surgery was WWE wrestlers. That's right. You may not be able to get rid of this thought now, and you'll see Rey Mysterio in Altair. Desilet was focused on wrestlers because of their slight clumsiness, despite the fact that they're well prepared physically and acrobatically. Altair had to use more brute force and become more of a beast than a killer. To further emphasize the image of the predatory bird, the developers designed a unique costume. Altair wears a hood with a pointed end and outfits with side slits, so that when he jumped, his silhouette and shadow resembled an eagle. With the plot of the future game, the question was a little simpler. The framework of the world in which Altair was supposed to exist was already in Desilet's head. The events of the Third Crusade, the secret Templar Order, and ancient Persia have already been coordinated with the team. In addition, the main storyline that Desilet took from the same novel, Alamut by Vladimir Bartol, was already ready. Namely, the story of the relationship between teacher and student, which was inspired by the relationship of the master of all assassins, Hassani Sraba, and the young Abin Tahir. In the story, Tahir finds himself in the assassin's stronghold in search of a better life. Hassani Sraba takes the young man and initiates him into the Order of Assassins. While training, Tahir increasingly accepts the faith of the assassins, and as a result, he's ready to give his life for Hassani Sraba. By the way, it was from this myth that the legendary feature of the entire Assassin's Creed series was born, Leap of Faith. That is, a jump from a height into a pile of hay. Yes, this trick is not Desilet's invention. In the myth, the elder asked his soldiers to jump off a cliff to prove their faith and loyalty to the Brotherhood. But the main thing that Desilet took from this novel is the philosophy of assassins.
Nothing is true. Everything is permitted.
If you analyze it, this expression was both brilliant and very dangerous, and Desilet knew it. After all, young minds who were supposed to be inspired by the Assassin's universe in the future could theoretically interpret the expression as something connected with anarchy, but the expression had nothing to do with anarchy and unscrupulousness. In the original interpretation, the first part of the aphorism, "Nothing is true," indicates the shakiness of the dogmas of society arising from forgotten traditions, prejudices, habits, and public opinion. Sebach believed that only the person himself can build his future, and this is impossible if you constantly look back at those around you. The second part, "Everything is permitted," in turn means taking full responsibility for your actions and your own fate. No one is able to limit a person in his actions except for himself, and everyone can become who they want. The main thing is to understand where the desires of others end and our own begin, because only they matter. It was this philosophy that Desilet put into the foundation of the first part of Assassin's Creed. This was the real motto of the Assassins, and for an open-world game, it was the perfect credo that would describe the gameplay as a kind of improvisation. Freedom of choice and freedom of movement are exactly what the team have been striving to achieve since the beginning of development. In all this historical everyday life, which was the basis of the world of Assassin's Creed, Desilet lacked something, a certain plot zest. Patrice recalls meeting the team for the first 9 months, trying to find what everyone would like. And it was, if I remember correctly, Felipe Morin, who's now head of Red Barrels, the guy who's making Outlast. We worked together, and he said, "What if we used the Apple of Eden? This apple. Let's say the apple existed." That's a neat idea, and it's funny somehow. Everybody kills each other to get an apple. But it's the apple of Eden, right? It's the apple of knowledge. It's the apple. And then we looked around in all of those medieval paintings and we saw the royal orb, a spherical object portrayed in the hands of rulers to symbolize faith, the globe, and world domination, in reference to the biblical apple. And no matter how much we take on faith what is written in the Bible, but it was this detail, apples of Eden, that breathed life into the gray medieval world of the game. It became more interesting because it revealed secrets of the past to players and gave the characters a clear goal. When Altair's story was almost ready, Desilet was left to solve the last question: what to do with the old time-rewinding mechanics he introduced in the Prince of Persia. Such gameplay and narrative technique was a sin to lose, especially when you want to create a sense of complete immersion in the world for the player. In one interview, the game designer recalls, "And then one night I saw a TV show about DNA on a history channel. I don't remember where, and I thought, what if there's a machine that could actually read memories of your DNA and that your ancestors live through your DNA, and not only biologically, but really like memories. And I thought, oh, so we could have this machine that lets you relive the lives of your ancestors through your DNA." So thanks to some TV show, Animus appeared in the world of Assassin's Creed, a machine that can access the genetic memory inherited by a person from his ancestors and recorded in his DNA, and is able to transfer a person to a simulated reality, in our case, to the Holy Land during the Third Crusade. The Animus becomes as much a narrative device for Desilet as the prince telling his story to Farah. This technique allowed the developers to easily justify all the players' mistakes, character deaths, and re-uploads, arguing with the words, "Oh, you're dead, but it didn't happen that way." As a result, what started out as a dry historical drama soon turned into a sci-fi fiction movie with biblical motifs. And the question is, what could be better than this, when you can also jump on roofs and run wherever you want? apparently only... Jokes aside, Desilet's colossal ambitions still had to be realized somehow. Not only that, but the game needed to depict life as realistically as possible so that the player could feel every stone beneath Altair's feet. The game engine was created for quite a long time. The team then began building a combat system and searching for references for future Altair parkour animations based on the Prince of Persia engine. Finally, in 2006, Langley and Mazzaroli completed work on the base of the future game, and the team was able to start working on the engine of Assassin's Creed itself. First of all, in the process of creating a huge open world, which was supposed to be not just a decoration, but a living and breathing organism, the team decided to recreate the entire Holy Land, a large kingdom that included the three main cities of the time: Jerusalem, Acre, and Damascus. In order to accurately recreate all three cities, the team worked fruitfully with historians and researchers of the ancient East. And to make these medieval cities really seem alive, the developers created about 300 different NPC characters, including homeless people and monks, rich people and merchants, military personnel, and others. According to art director for cinematics Nicholas Canton, the crowd became something very important. There was a lot of research on my part about all those cities at the medieval time during the Crusades, to make sure we were doing something a little bit more realistic than fantasy. By the way, in addition to historical locations, the game will also feature real historical figures. In particular, the plot will feature King Richard with the Lion Heart, his Viceroy in Acre, William of Montferrat, Master of the Templar Order Robert de Sable, Grand Master of the Order of Hospitallers Garnier de Naples, and the founder of the Teutonic Order, Sibrand. In addition, heralds in Jerusalem and Damascus remember Sultan Salah al-Din. But I don't think that creating a realistic world was easy. One crowd wasn't enough for that. The crowd had to interact with the space, which had to be no less realistic. In addition, the location itself had to be built in such a way that Altair's parkour did not look out of place in it. It was a real hell for the developers, and this was a novelty for the world of the game industry. After all, developers are used to controlling the sequence of the gameplay and placing key gameplay points directly on the player's path. Usually, earlier in adventure games, the character was only in one closed location, so the developers could easily calculate and predict all possible collisions of the hero with space. To do this, developers always use so-called guidance. Guidance are mechanics that characterize objects for the player. For example, that there is a space for walking in front of him, or it's a thing that he can grab, or it's a thing on which he can pull up. If the developers were faced with the task of creating a standard linear location where there's only one path for the player to interact with the environment, then there'd be no problems. But the Assassin development team had to build an entire Jerusalem, and it became impossible to implement such mechanics. Therefore, level designers had to come up with a new model for building levels for the mechanic of directions. This model was Lego blocks, which were simply combined in several different variations to make the locations interesting and distract players' attention from the fact that the same buildings are being used over and over again. The developers dealt with placement of houses quickly, but there was a serious problem with their visualization and design. The team had a completely open world which had to be filled with a huge number of household items, exterior and interior details. It was impossible to hide anywhere. In the open world, the player can get to any place on the map and see that it's not finalized. Therefore, on the outskirts of the game world, everything should be perfect, as well as in the center of it. In addition, the level designer had to think through all possible cracks, windowsills, and protruding places of the houses so that Altair could catch onto them and climb up. It was at this time that Maxime de Bellin joined the team, who took the position of the new game designer of the game. Patrice Desilet, who was originally both the creative director and responsible for the design of the game, realized that he was no longer able to manage two demanding positions with such a heavy workload. So Patrice focused on the creative part. One of the main references to the design of the levels was real historical facts and archaeological research of everyday life and interiors. But Bellin was also inspired by the film Black Hawk Down, directed by Ridley Scott, in which, thanks to the blue tint of the image, the director conveyed the realism of the place where the events took place in color. At the same time, Bellin also borrowed the medieval entourage and entertainment of the ancient East from Ridley Scott. Their designers recreated them from the film Kingdom of Heaven. While working on the design and layout of levels, the Assassins team simultaneously created animations for the main character and NPCs. Alex Struan was responsible for that. And the team was finally lucky, because in 2006, already during the development of Assassin's Creed, Ubisoft Montreal created its own motion capture studio. For the animators of Assassin's Creed, this was a lifeline, because it was almost impossible to make realistic animation completely manually at that time. No professional stuntmen were used to create Altair's animations. Absolutely all jumps and fighting techniques in the game were performed by Alex Drone himself. After all, before that, Alex was professionally engaged in Kung Fu and Capoeira. We were going in Ubisoft's garage with the cars because this is where we had space to swing a sword with me and the other animator, and then we would go to the mocap shoot and dress ourselves and beat the crap out of each other. The primary goal in creating the animation was realism, ensuring that players could feel the weight of their sword held by Altair or any of the enemies. Separately, the developers paid great attention to details. For example, when Altair pierces an opponent with a sword, his blade gets slightly stuck in the body, and the character needs to apply more force to pull it out. But in addition to Altair, the team had to animate all the residents of the city. That was 300 characters. Therefore, in order to somehow simplify the task, the basis for all residents in the game was the animation of Altair. The last point that the developers had to prove was the soundtrack. The musical accompaniment for Assassin's Creed was written by Jesper Kyd, and the overall mood of the soundtrack was supposed to convey to the player the grim atmosphere of medieval warfare while also maintaining a sharp, modern edge. The musical score was written using orchestral music with dark and sinister notes. Many tracks contained choruses and vocal parts in Latin to emphasize the dark elements of the game and the time period in which the game takes place. While the graphic beauty and detail of Assassin's Creed are striking and immediately apparent, the music achieves an equal level of beauty within the game. It deserves special attention. Each location in the game has its own theme and distinct musical identity, from the tragedy-stricken city of Akko to the proud, stoic fortress of Damascus and the powerful spiritual, multicultural capital of Jerusalem. In addition, Kyd created unique compositions for such Altair mechanics as Eagle Vision, Disguise in the Crowd, and Sneak Altair to the target, emphasizing them with surreal and hypnotic compositions that start with a measured tone and develop into a quick fervor as you approach the goal. But while the game was still in fruitful development, the main plot of the game was already ready. Gradually, the project began to be assembled into a ready main game. But what's the plot about? It's time to remember what adventures awaited Altair and future Assassin's Creed players. The story of the Assassin's Creed series is much deeper and more confusing than it may seem at first glance. Therefore, to clarify everything, we'll begin our dive into the history archives from the very beginning. Well, this is too much. We'd better start with the main character of the series, Desmond Miles. But don't worry, Altair we've been talking about before hasn't disappeared. We'll return to it very soon. Desmond Miles was a member of the Assassins and a descendant of numerous families who swore allegiance to the Order of Assassins. Among them were Aquilus, Altair, Ezio Auditore, Edward Kenway, and Rotonaketon. Desmond was born in the United States on March 13, 1987, in an assassin's cache called The Farm near Black Hills, west of Rapid City. The cache was an autonomous complex with a population of about 30 people. All of them led a nomadic lifestyle. Desmond trained with the other children of the farm under the supervision of his father, William Miles. As the years passed, Desmond began to get bored with incomprehensible training and stories about the war between assassins and Templars. As a result, Desmond came to the conclusion that his parents were nothing more than ordinary conspiracy theorists, so he decided to leave the farm and start a normal life.
There is no farmer, Babs. Is he on holiday? He isn't anywhere. Don't you get it? There's no morning egg count, no farmers, no dogs and coops and keys, and no fences.
Desmond's escape took place on his 16th birthday. To escape from the assassins who were chasing him, the young man was helped by training and stealth skills. After that, Desmond traveled the Badlands for a while and hitchhiked, until eventually he came across a random man who advised him to go to New York. While hiding in New York City, in 2005, Desmond met a woman with whom he accidentally conceived a child, who would have thought that a new reason to lie low for the second time would be a leaky cellophane bag. Just kidding. But the guy still had to lie low. A few more years later, Desmond got a job as a bartender at the Bad Weather Bar. Avoiding surveillance and harassment, Desmond never used his real name anywhere and never paid with a credit card. But it came on September 1st, 2012, the day when Abstergo, which we will discuss later, found Desmond. He was tracked down by the fingerprint he once left to get his driver's license. Desmond was abducted by Abstergo agents and taken to a laboratory in Italy. The next day, after waking in Abstergo, Desmond realized that he was a prisoner. He was going to be used as a test subject for the Animus, a device that could read the memories of human ancestors through genetic memory. So who was this Abstergo, and what did they want from Desmond? Abstergo Industries was officially founded in 1937 and existed as a small part of the Templar plan to control the world through capitalism, wars, and scientific progress. At first, the company served as a cover for everything, which gave it the opportunity to accumulate wealth and accelerate scientific progress. The main unspoken slogan of the company was, "Graze those who are lower than us for life, even if strength is needed." Abstergo's origins lie in the perfection of the assembly line, created by Templars Henry Ford and Ransom Rennie Olds at the turn of the 20th century. The assembly line was the first means of controlling both the workers and the capitalists who hired them. This was the first step in achieving the Templars' goal of conquering the world through economics. In addition, the main mission of Abstergo Industries, dictated by its Templar members, was to destroy the Order of Assassins, obtain advanced technologies created by the first civilization, and establish a new world order. And by the technologies of the first civilizations, we mean the Apple of Eden. The technologies that allow control over a person's actions, emotions, and behavior are linked to the mysterious pieces of Eden. In fact, humans were specially created by members of the first civilization in such a way that they could be controlled using the Apple of Eden. Throughout human history, the Apples of Eden were used all over the world. Their owners have changed the world more than once. These artifacts were often the cause of many events in history. So, for example, one of them became the catalyst for the Trojan War in the 12th century BC. The power of apples was first discovered by the Templar Order, founded in 1129. The Order realized that the path to control the entire world could be opened thanks to these artifacts. So they started a bloody hunt for them, which continues to this day. To help you understand how much influence the Templars had, here are some examples. The defeat of communism was a key part of the Templar plan, as it represented both an ideological and economic threat to the success of the world in the Templar vision. So, for example, in 1948, Abstergo eliminated the former Templar and famous economist Harry Dexter White. White helped the Templars organize the International Monetary Fund of the World Bank, two organizations that allowed them to expand their capitalist vision of the world. However, White secretly passed on information to the communists, so Abstergo killed White for his betrayal. Abstergo is also responsible for the criminal prosecution of British mathematician Alan Turing and possibly his death. The Templars feared mass unemployment because if a mathematician had successfully developed robots, such an invention would have threatened to advance their plan. Until now, you probably thought that NASA was a civilian branch of the US government, but in reality, NASA was tasked with creating new spacecraft and technologies to use Abstergo. When the Templars became aware of the existence of the Apple of Eden on the moon, they assigned NASA a mission to land on the moon and pick up the artifact. Also, when President John F. Kennedy planned a joint landing on the moon with the Soviet Union, the Templars decided to remove Kennedy from power. Kennedy's successor, Lyndon B. Johnson, a puppet of the Templars, continued his exploration of the moon. So in July 1969, Templar agents Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon and took a piece of Eden. In the last decades of the 20th century, Abstergo emerged from the shadows as a powerful corporation that leads the pharmaceutical industry, although it also did research in other areas such as communications. For example, in 1985, Abstergo's research department secretly worked on a device that could mimic the properties of mind control thanks to a piece of Eden. In the same year, Abstergo developed its first full-feature Animus device and began looking for suitable subjects for testing. All this is just a small part of what Abstergo was involved in, but after all, why would they think of some poor Desmond Miles? That's all because of the Apple of Eden and Piece of Eden, but let's take it in order. Eden is a type of sophisticated technology that was created by the ISU race. We'll talk about them later. Pieces of Eden are mystical artifacts, which can be weapons, armor, apples, and so on. These artifacts respond to a network of neurotransmitters in the human brain, and the main purpose of their development was to control human thoughts, emotion, and behavior. Together, they activate a large machine to control the consciousness of the entire planet. If the ISU had invented television a little earlier, everything might have turned out differently. But who are the ISU? Does his name remind you of anything? We're not trying to hint at anything, but yes, this theory comes pretty close to the truth, as the ISU say them about themselves, quote, "We are not gods, we just came earlier." ISU is an ancient and highly developed species of humanoid creatures that lived on Earth in the epoch of the same name. Several millennia before the emergence of even the most ancient human civilizations, they ruled the Earth about 77,000 years ago before being destroyed along with many of their human creations in a major disaster, when there was a huge coronal mass ejection of the Sun, which largely burned the Earth, Jupiter, and Juno. Before this, the ISU were at war for 10 years with a human revolt led by two hybrids, Adam and Eve. who sought to free humanity from serving the gods. After the Great Disaster, the ISU population quickly declined to the point of almost complete extinction, but their legacy continued to live on for thousands of years through myths and legends, becoming the center of many human religions, polytheistic or monotheistic. In addition, those pieces of Eden that survived the Great Catastrophe also influenced the development of primitive man. In the end, they became the most desirable targets for both the Templar Order and the Brotherhood of Assassins, who waged their own war for control of pieces and the future of humanity. But will anyone finally answer how Desmond is involved in all of this?
What the fuck is this?
In early 2012, the head of Abstergo transferred control of the company to an unknown person. In a telephone conversation, he warned his successor that if the free market collapsed, the civilian population would turn against capitalism and Abstergo. Abstergo also suffered a major setback in its Abstergo project when an incident known as a satellite crash at Denver International Airport occurred in Denver, resulting in significant civilian casualties. The incident occurred at the underground facility of Abstergo Industries, under the airport. Daniel Cross, the project manager who worked on the experiment involving the Abstergo satellite, was affected by the Apple of Eden and killed all employees at the facility, more than 20 people. But the main thing is that the artifact, the Apple of Eden, was destroyed. However, with the great success of the Animus project at the same time, Abstergo compensated for the disaster in Denver. So in September of that year, the Pedigree Discovery and Acquisition Department captured a new Animus subject, the Sample 17, instead of the deceased Subject 16. That Sample 17 was Desmond Miles. The fact is that Desmond was a direct relative of Altair ibn al-Had, that same Altair from the clan of assassins who lived during the Third Crusade. Therefore, Abstergo needed him to find out through the Animus where the rest of Eden is located. By the way, we're almost close to the events of the game. It remains only to reveal the character of great-great-great-grandfather Desmond, Altair. Altair was born on January 11, 1165, in a family of assassins, a Christian mother, Maud, and a Muslim father, Umar ibn al-Had, who devoted his entire life, who would have thought, to the Brotherhood of Assassins. When Altair was still a child, the siege of Masyaf by the Saracen army began. Umar was instructed to infiltrate the enemy camp and leave a message there. He did it almost perfectly, but he was discovered. Umar escaped from the camp and was forced to kill one of the generals of the enemy army on the way. Everything would have been fine, but later, peace negotiations between Masyaf and the Saracens, and the latter demanded the death of Umar in exchange for the life of the murdered general. Otherwise, the Saracens promised to continue the siege and kill the captured assassin Ahmet. Mintar al-Mualim, the head of the Order of Assassins, was forced to execute Umar in front of his young son. Altair blamed the traitor Ahmet for his father's death, but in reality he was not to blame. At the same time, al-Mualim apologized to 10-year-old Altair and asked him not to blame Ahmet for anything. However, in the end, Ahmet could not stand it and passed away. Al-Mualim ordered Altair to keep what had happened a secret, not to tell anyone, not even Abbas, Ahmet's son. Abbas was lied to, saying that Ahmet had left Masyaf. The very next day, Altair and Abbas began their studies at the Brotherhood. They grew up friends, and in the future, Altair told Abbas the truth about his father's death. Abbas refused to believe this, and there was a conflict between them. He demanded that Altair admit that his words were a lie. The commotion attracted the attention of other assassins, peasants, and Al-Mualim himself. Trying to calm Abbas's anger, Altair confessed that he had lied, and both were taken to Masyaf's dungeon. There, they spent a month in prison before resuming their studies. Since Abbas's crimes were considered more serious, Al-Mualim made Abbas spend an extra year in training, and Altair was promoted to assassin. Since then, Altair and Abbas had become unspoken rivals. Later, when Altair was 25 years old, the Third Crusade raged in the Holy Land in 1190. The Crusaders fought against the Saracens for control of the holy city of Jerusalem. Meanwhile, Altair returned home after a difficult journey, and a clan elder instructed him to find and retrieve a sacred object, the chalice.
What is your name?
Sir Robin of Camelot.
What is your quest?
To seek the Holy Grail.
What is the capital of Assyria?
This treasure could unite all factions under one banner, whoever owned it, Crusaders or Saracens. Thus, Altair could end the Third Crusade with the victory of one of the two camps. But the chalice is too powerful an object to be left in the hands of humans. It must be found and destroyed. And what is most interesting, the chalice is not just the grail that we're used to imagining. This is a real girl named Adha, whom Altair now needs to save from the leaders of the Templars, Basilisk. Altair finds the girl on a Basilisk ship that is moored in the city of Tyr. Altair managed to get on the ship and kill the Basilisk, but it turned out that Aja was sailing on a nearby Templar boat. The ship Altair was on was set on fire, forcing him to jump overboard. When Altair reached safety, he could only watch as the ship carrying Aja sailed out to sea. He swore that at any cost, even his life, he would find her. Months passed and eventually Altair did find her, but she was already dead. Consumed by grief, Altair killed everyone involved in her death, though it no longer held any meaning. Such a story about the beginning of the Crusade and the mystical chalice, Ada, fans of the games could see in the prequel to the first part of the series, Assassin's Creed Altair's Chronicles, released in 2008. It's after this part that the story of Altair begins, so let's move on to it. At the beginning of the Assassin's Creed story, Desmond enters Altair's memory, but soon has trouble syncing the Animus. Meanwhile, Desmond begins to hear the voice of Lucy Stillman and Warren Vidic, Abstergo's employees, arguing about his safety in Animus. After several Animus crashes, Desmond exits the virtual reality machine. Before initializing the machine's training program, Vidic tells Desmond about the internal structure of the Animus. After completing his training, Desmond enters Altair's closest memory with which he can synchronize. Lucy clarifies that Desmond must relive key moments in Altair's life to improve his synchronization before reaching the last memory that contains the information needed by Abstergo. Desmond plunges into the year 1191 when Altair, as a high-ranking assassin, tries to steal an artifact from the series known as Pieces of Eden on one of the important tasks. In the Solomon's Temple, he, along with two other assassins, Malik and his brother Qadar al-Saif, discover that they've been overtaken by Robert Desilet, Grand Master of the Templar Order and a sworn enemy of the Assassins. Trying to take the treasure from the Templars and kill Robert, Altair violates all three tenets of the Assassin's Creed. Never stray your blade against the flesh of an innocent, hide in plain sight, and never compromise the Brotherhood under attack. However, Robert defeats Altair and he's forced to flee empty-handed. Altair returns to the Assassin's stronghold in Masyaf to repent of his actions, and then Malik, who survived the Templar attack, returns with the artifact and despises Altair because of his arrogance. Upon arriving in Masyaf, Altair witnesses a Templar army launching an attack on the Assassin's stronghold. Barely repelling the attack, Assassin leader Al-Mualim demoted Altair to a novice, but gave him another chance to move up the Brotherhood's career ladder. Al-Mualim instructed Altair to kill 9 key figures in the Holy Land, in Jerusalem Acre, and Damascus, in order to establish peace between the Crusaders and the Saracens. He must kill real historical figures. Completing each kill order, Altair puts together a puzzle, learning how each target is connected to Robert and the Templars, and how they all want to put an end to the Crusades and bring the Holy Land back under their control. After killing all the victims, Altair learns that Robert's latest plan is to try to unite Christian and Muslim forces against their new common enemy, the Assassins. In the end, unable to convince the king that an end to the war would be desirable for both sides, Altair kills Robert in front of King Richard I of England, thereby putting an end to the Templar plans.
It's done then. Your schemes, like you, are put to rest.
From the dying Robert, Altair learns that Al-Mualim helped the Templars find Piece of Eden in the Solomon's Temple. But in the end, Al-Mualim betrayed them, as well as the Assassins, to keep the artifact for himself. After this session in Animus, Desmond wakes up and learns that modern-day assassins are trying to save him and capture Abstergo. Because Desmond himself was once an assassin, but the offensive on Abstergo was repulsed. Vidic leaves the Animus Hall, and Lucy shows Desmond that she is an undercover assassin, hiding her ring finger in the palm of her hand. It refers to the tradition of assassins to cut off their finger to use their signature weapon, a hidden blade. Desmond returns to the Animus. Meanwhile, Altair returns to Masyaf and encounters his leader Al-Mualim, who reveals the truth to him. A Piece of Eden isn't a supernatural artifact, but rather a device that creates powerful illusions. Al-Mualim begins to question religion and other seemingly supernatural events. For example, the 10 Commandments of God, or Moses, who made waves in the Red Sea. He claims that all of these are illusions caused by a Piece of Eden. He also declares his intention to use the artifact to bring humanity to a state of complete brainwashing in order to put an end to all conflicts in this way. Eventually, Altair manages to recognize the trick created by the artifact, and he kills Al-Mualim. When Altair takes an artifact, the Piece of Eden is activated, showing a holographic image of the Earth with the locations of other pieces of Eden. Countless piles of place marks appear all over the globe. When the process is complete, Desmond disconnects from the Animus and learns that Abstergo is a modern Templar front, and that they're already searching for pieces of Eden in the places mentioned in Altair's memories. After that, Desmond must be killed on the orders of high-ranking Templar Alan Rickon. Not to be confused with Alan Rickman, but Lucy saves Desmond by convincing Rickon and the others that Desmond can still be useful to them.
And the assassin?
We have what we need. Kill him.
Wait. You know how these things work. I doubt we'll be able to walk right in. We might need him. His memories. I'd recommend we hold him until we have confirmation that there aren't any surprises waiting for us at the sites.
Desmond remains trapped in Abstergo's lab. In addition, his last session in the Animus caused him internal bleeding. This allowed Desmond to use Altair's eagle vision and allowed him to see strange messages painted on the walls of his room and on the lab floor. All reports relate to the end of the world and its various forms and manifestations in different cultures, including several references to December 21st, 2012, the date when Abstergo's plans to launch a satellite that will put an end to war forever. Presumably, this will be done in the same way that Al-Mualim hypnotized Altair in the final battle, only on a larger scale. Desmond wonders what all these images mean and who could have drawn them. But this is where the plot of the first part of the Assassin's Creed series ends. The game ends at the most interesting moment, hinting to fans about a possible sequel. Who would have thought that a story that began with a romantic fairy tale about the Prince of Persia would turn into such an impressive fantasy scenario? And indeed, 3 years of game development were not in vain. But did the Assassin's Creed team want to turn the page of history in the world of adventure games with just the plot of the game? It's time to remember what the gameplay of the first Assassin's Creed was like. Spoiler alert, it was incredible. The team of Assassin's Creed deployed in front of gamers the expanses of the Holy Land, where the player could feel almost free in their actions, if you do not take into account the main storyline and completing quests. In general, you can remember the phrase, almost free, because we will still need it. Instead of requiring players to follow a planned and developer-designed path, Assassin's Creed really gives the player the opportunity to play something more. The gamer is able to choose the best routes to get into the city, to find the target, and pursue it, as well as to get rid of the pursuit of guards. Assassin's Creed required situational awareness from the player to enter the room and discreetly inspect exits and entrances, lines of sight, and potential enemy elimination sites. Everything in the game, even the main storyline, is based on the fact that you are an actor and you play the role of a killer. As Desilet himself recalls, quote, "I wanted to replace the car of GTA with a third-person action character. The pleasure of driving a car in Liberty City should be the same as the main character in Assassin's Creed." Patrice Desilet. That's true. If you break down the overall gameplay, it primarily revolves around exploring new territories, gathering crucial information on the Templars, engaging in combat, and progressing through the reward system. And essentially, that's the core of it. Even considering that the freedom to choose the path we're talking about was quite conditional in the game. For example, there are only 3 routes leading to one of the bosses, choosing one of which randomly, it was impossible to switch to the other. Is this freedom of choice? Apparently today, the players confidently answered no, but was that enough for the 2007 players? Most likely yes. After all, against the background of other games of that time, Assassin's Creed had incredible graphics and a detailed image of the real world, and in addition, the very illusion of choice. But let's take a closer look at all the mechanics of the first Assassin's Creed that make this franchise legendary. As we've already said, the basis of the gameplay of Assassin's Creed was the player's performance of quests, both main and side. The player could receive quests from the ideological leader of all assassins, Al-Mualim, or in special places called the Assassin's Bureau. It was usually hidden somewhere in the back of buildings, and you could only get there by climbing up to the roof. In the Assassin's Bureau, the player was met by a man from the Assassin Order who gave him tasks. Basically, the missions in the game were to kill someone from the Templar Order. But before the player went to kill him, he was faced with side tasks. After all, one of the postulates of the Assassins, never stray your blade against the flesh of an innocent, should work even if the innocent is a Templar. So first, the player had to collect information for each specific target of the murder. To do this, the player had an Altair ability to use Eagle Vision. According to the plot, this ability is not a mutation of Altair or a fantastic invention of the developers. Just in this way, the developers tried to convey to the player the usual intuition or the sixth sense of a person, and Altair's intuition was very developed. In general, the game is played from a third-person perspective, but in Eagle Vision mode, the camera switched to a first-person view. Non-interactive objects merge with the background, fade, and enemies are highlighted in red. Scholars are highlighted in blue. People related to tasks such as theft, eavesdropping, and interrogation are highlighted in white, and the goals of the task, potential victims, are shown in yellow. By the way, there are several ways in the game that Altair can collect information about the target. The first method is the usual eavesdropping on people's conversations. To start eavesdropping, the player needs to find people in the crowd that he will eavesdrop on. Then sit on the next bench, not too close or too far away from them. Thus, Altair merges with the crowd looking like a civilian, and as a result can use the information he hears to his advantage. The next, less humane collection of information in the game is interrogation. The mechanics of questioning can range from establishing a relationship with the subject to intimidation and even torture. Also, one of the ways to obtain information by Altair is pickpocketing, the mechanics of stealing an object, valuables, secret documents, and most often, money from a person close to the target of the murder. We wonder if stealing a horse can be considered getting information. Although the same result can be achieved without spoiling the so-called reputation of an honest killer. For example, pickpocketing allows you to avoid a possible fight with enemies at all, or the death of Altair. But to be honest, Altair can't actually die at all. More on that later. Pickpocketing can often be used not only for intelligence purposes, but also to obtain keys to free allied prisoners or to infiltrate and escape enemy territory. The last way to collect information in the game was the Informers, who were a member of a lower-ranking assassin's order. Like Sherlock, before getting information from the Informers, the player had to complete some kind of side quest for them. Informers could be found in Acre, Jerusalem, and Damascus by syncing the player at the viewing points. Thus, we smoothly got close to the next and main mechanics of the game: territory exploration. Because it mattered both to the player for the passage of the plot and for the story. The more territories Desmond discovers, the better his synchronization with Altair's DNA will be. Yes, it was this mechanic that ruined all the gameplay in the new parts of the Assassin's Creed series and other Ubisoft projects in the future, becoming almost a meme. The player could open new territories at special viewing points. Typically, the viewpoints were placed at heights far beyond what an average person could normally reach, and usually it was the crosses on the towers of churches, the top of the lighthouse, high sights of the city, and watchtowers. Each city contained from 10 to 12 observation decks, and as a rule, a haystack was placed near these synchronization points, into which Altair could take the same legendary leap of faith.
Yeah! Parkour! 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 I'm right behind you, Andy! Come on! Yeah! Parkour.
Haystacks in general often became useful to players because in addition to the rescue soft pillow, they served as another important mechanic of Assassin's Creed: mechanics of social status. This is one of the functions of the Animus, which shows how much society knows about the player, because as you know, another Assassin's Creed is hide in plain sight. For assassins, a safe way to move towards their goal is very important, without attracting the attention of the guards and remaining incognito for everyone. That is why the assassins moved unnoticed in the crowd of citizens or on the roofs of houses. In the game, the hero has a special counter that is located next to the health scale. It changes the color and shape of the Abstergo logo depending on how much the player knows about it. In fact, this is something similar to the search stars in the GTA series. In addition to the standard locations where Altair is generally safe, the player can encounter high alert areas. In this case, the social status indicator and the sync interface turn red. In such areas, the guards will always be especially vigilant and citizens will quickly run to the sides if the guards start chasing Altair. In such cases, to make his escape, Altair can use the conveniently placed haystacks scattered around the city. They are vital for shelter mechanics. No, there are no air alarms at Assassin's Creed. Shelters here are special places that help Altair break away from the pursuit. On the map, they're shown as blue circles, but they're only visible in the case of a chase. A shelter can either be a haystack, a bench, bushes, a crowd of people, a well, or a group of scholars whose clothing is very similar to an assassin's.
You won't get away from me!
However, the guards are not as stupid as they may seem at first glance. Some types of guards are able to explore the shelter and thereby discover where the assassin is hiding, so keep that in mind. The game also includes rescue missions where Altair saves local residents from harassment and ridicule by guards. These people are often falsely accused of crimes. Thus, becoming the Batman of the Third Crusade, Altair gains his loyalty from the townspeople. As a result, they become potential allies for the player, which can help him escape. But it happens that Altair still does not manage to escape from the guards. Well, you know, there are wet tiles or the laces on your sneakers are untied. In this case, weapons are used. There are not very many of them in the game, but the combat mechanics themselves are very interesting. Battles in the game take place in real time. You just need to capture the target and get a sword. Of course, it's much better for the player to attack his target from behind and make an inconspicuous kill, but even after a successful attempt, you'll still have to deal with soldiers. Therefore, you'll not be able to play the game exclusively in Styles mode. This is just an option that is sometimes very pleasant to use. The combat system in Assassin's Creed is very simple, but thanks to a diverse, high-quality animation and cinematic camera work, it has a spectacular and rather cruel look. Fights always take place with swords, and Altair is able to make attacks, put blocks, and counterattacks. The first two actions can be useful against a small number of enemies. Counterattacks, for their part, are the cornerstone of the game and the clearest way to kill. They look driving and epic, like X-Ray in Mortal Kombat. By the way, we have a separate video about the history of the creation of this absolutely legendary series of games on our channel. If you're interested in how fatalities appeared in Mortal Kombat, be sure to watch at the end of this video. In the meantime, let's get back to Altair's counterattacks. Once the player learns how to use them correctly, battles will no longer be the same as before. They'll stop being exciting. That is why their difficulty varies depending on the number and level of opponents. Each battle, even if an entire army is facing Altair, is a duel, or rather a collection of duels. Soldiers attack only one at a time if you wait for them to attack. However, if the player attacks first, they may encounter a random enemy attack and not have time to repel it. And when the player's skills are enough to simultaneously attack one opponent and repel the attacks of the second, and also dodge the attack of the third, that's when the Assassin's Creed combat system plays to the fullest. In the player's combat arsenal, in addition to the legendary hidden blade that extends from Altair's sleeve, there's also a sword and dagger. A hidden blade is always used at a short distance close to the enemy. The sword is convenient for long distances, and the dagger is useful for medium distances. Also, at considerable distances, instead of a sword, Altair can use throwing knives, the number of which varies from 5 to 15 throughout the game. If you throw a knife at an opponent, they'll almost certainly not get up again. Unfortunately, these weapons are useless against the key targets that Altair is hunting. You can't kill them with a single knife, but you can slow them down during the chase. In addition, the use of throwing knives almost always requires fixing the target. Otherwise, there's a high probability that Altair will make a mistake. You can't pick up knives again, so they run out over time. But the developers tried to make this moment closer to life, so new knives can be stolen from bandits in the city or taken before the mission in the Assassin's Bureau. If Altair steals the knives without being noticed, he'll earn 5. However, if he provokes a fight and wins, he'll only receive 1. But most often the player will use a hidden blade, which is informally called Devil's Claw. Of course, why play Assassin's Creed at all if you don't use this iconic weapon? With a hidden blade, Altair can destroy enemies without attracting attention and then quickly hide from the scene. You can attack from any side. The only thing that matters is speed. If the soldier recognizes the assassin before he can pull out the blade, the blow will be blocked and a normal battle will start between Altair and the guards. By the way, in duel mode without a sword with a hidden blade, Altair cannot block enemy attacks, but counterattacks allow you to kill even a Templar with one blow. One of the most ridiculous and unnecessary weapons in the game are Altair's own fists. They're only needed for fights with bandits, interrogations, or to grab the enemy and just push them aside. Although, if you are an outspoken masochist, you can try to complete the game exclusively on your fists. As for those with whom Altair will have to fight, everything is simple here. There are only 4 types of enemies in the game. The first is a typical city guard. They look like clones from Star Wars. Everyone has the same face. They are equally clad in medium-strength armor and armed with a standard sword. The second type is almost the same, sentries, but some of them are put to guard the roofs of buildings and given a bow in their hands. They would have to have 100% vision to notice a fly from a kilometer away, but for some reason they never notice a jumping man in a white suit. The third type of opponents is sentries, who are equipped with heavier armor. They're also armed with a regular sword, but now they have extra armor on their body and a helmet on their head. But it still won't help them. The last type of enemies in the game are the targets themselves, who were ordered to kill, or the Templars. It's hard to even call them bosses. These are just elite mobs surrounded by a large number of guards, each of which stands out only for its own person in history. They even have a combat system that is practically no different from ordinary sentries. There are only Altair's damage dealt, the speed of attacks, and the chance to counterattack. Well, they have more health. But perhaps you should not blame the developers that this is a hack, because they wanted to make everything as realistic as possible. Therefore, the fact that an elite opponent is not much different from an ordinary one is normal, because they are all just people. The only one who stands out from all the enemies is the final boss of the game, Al-Mualim. Through the Apple of Eden, he gained supernatural powers and was able to teleport, summon people who were killed by Altair, and create a bunch of clones of himself. In addition to that, this old man also has the fastest attacks in the game. Therefore, the character completely coped with the role of the final boss and former mastermind of the assassins. Altair can deal with any enemy in the game. Well, of course, who wouldn't be able to handle being immortal? This is not entirely true. In Assassin's Creed, the hero does not have the traditional health reserves for many games. It was replaced by the synchronization level of Desmond and Altair. Therefore, falling from a height, missing guard strikes, hitting arrows, and killing innocent people reduce the hero's synchronization with DNA. If it drops to 0, desynchronization occurs, and the last stable memory is loaded. By the way, it's worth noting that Altair can't swim, just like the GTA characters in Vice City, so falling into the water immediately causes desynchronization. After each successful mission completed by the player, synchronization increases on the contrary. In addition, you can also increase it with additional tasks. For every 15 completed side missions, including rescuing residents and opening viewpoints, 1 synchronization division is added. As a result, you can get up to 20 synchronization divisions by completing all third-party tasks and conducting all investigations, and only 13 if you complete only story missions. In general, as for the content and mechanics available to the player, this is not all that the developers wanted to implement in the game. As is often the case, Desilet's team had to cut out some content just before the game was released. In Assassin's Creed, there should have been 3 times more side quests and a little more basic ones. But one of the key obstacles to this was the engine, which appeared in developers too late to create more quests. Another problem for the developers was that Ubisoft itself refused to give Desilet's team another year to develop. One of the very notable elements that the developers had to cut out was the crossbow that we see in the game's intro. Officially, the developers removed it to preserve its historicity, and some believe that the developers saw how during the first tests, players use a crossbow to kill key targets from a long distance, and this contradicted the concept of the game. After all, in the view of the developers, the player must sneak up on the victim unnoticed and surprise it with his hidden blade. But the main thing that the developers did not implement in the final version of Assassin's Creed is the multiplayer mode. No one but the developers know exactly what it was supposed to look like, but it would probably be a lot of fun and cool. In fact, this is all that, so to speak, quote, did not reach the hands of the players. So it's time to move on to the most interesting part, the secrets and Easter eggs of the first part of Assassin's Creed. However, we'll not start quite with Easter eggs. Desilet's team gave Assassin's Creed a unique feature, the ability for players to complete the game entirely without any interface. It was an extremely unique experience that literally destroyed gamers' perception of games. Even with the interface and minimap, it was difficult to find certain locations or the right people in the game. Without the interface, the player received a cinematic killer simulator. Not a single map, not a single clue. Sit and listen to what people say, follow the sun and horizon, and decide for yourself where to go. It's all the same philosophy. Nothing is true. Everything is permitted. Nothing is true. Everything is permitted. Of course, few players dared to complete the entire game without an interface, but let's take a look at the Easter eggs. First, there are 420 flags scattered around the Assassin's Creed world that the player needs to collect. These flags indicate the places where Altair was actually located before Desmond synchronized with him. True, it's not exactly an Easter egg, but more of a collectible feature. And what can be considered an Easter egg is the location of windows on some buildings in Damascus and Acre. They resemble the shape of the front of Optimus Prime, the truck character from the Transformers franchise.
Autobots, transform!
When Altair activates the Apple of Eden at the end of the game, the player sees a hologram of Earth with marked dots. These points indicate parts of Eden, but if you compare this hologram with a real map, you can see these points indicate the hieroglyphs of Nazca, Stonehenge, Persepolis, and other wonders of the world. Finally, the main secret left by the developers in the game is the characters that Desmond sees in the final Assassin's Creed. You won't be able to find any explanations in the game itself, but we'll tell you now. When Abstergo finally received the necessary information from Desmond, they left him in the lab. Alone, Desmond revealed that he had gained Altair's ability of eagle vision through the bleeding, which allowed him to see a number of signs in the lab and in his bedroom. Desmond quickly realized that they were painted with the blood of his predecessor. This man, known as Subject 16, was kept in the Animus for so long that he later went crazy and accelerated his death after drawing the symbols. This man's name was Clay Kaczmarek. He, like Desmond, was a blood relative of the Assassins. As a member of the Brotherhood, Clay had a very important mission: to infiltrate Obstica Industries to get more information about the Animus. Labeled Subject 16, Clay was forced to relive the genetic memories of his ancestors, especially Ezio Auditore. When Clay learned that one of the assassins, named Lucy Stillman, who had infiltrated Abstergo many years ago with the task of safely getting him out of the lab, had betrayed the clan by joining the Templars, Clay had to spend endless hours of sessions inside the Animus. Because it left his consciousness unable to separate his own personality from those of his ancestors. Then Clay became mentally unstable and eventually passed away. After his death, Clay continued to exist as an artificial intelligence that recreated his identity in the Animus. In this way, he could manipulate most of the Animus programs from within to help his successor, who turned out to be Desmond Miles. The mystical symbols and signs left by glue may seem familiar to you, especially some of them, such as the inverted pentagram, which is a symbol of Satan. By the way, note that one of the peaks of the star points directly at the head of the Animus. This is Clay's attempt to show that the Animus is being used for evil purposes. Also above the bed of the main character, you can see the all-seeing eye. This is the same eye with the pyramid that is depicted on the dollar. You can also find the Pyramid of Eden, the original design of which consists of a series of eyes connected in a triangle with an apple directly above it. It symbolizes the Templars' plan to send a piece of Eden into orbit to control everything around them. Also, Clay's symbols include a whole bunch of mathematical drawings such as Borromean rings, Mandelbrot set formula, and Lorenz attractor, as well as drawings depicting the wonders of the world: Machu Picchu, Great Pyramid of Giza, the Mayan pyramids, Yonaguni, an island in Japan with an underwater formation that could have been created by man, and Nazca geoglyphs are also known as Nazca lines. In addition to this, you can see hieroglyphs on the wall that translate to hear is better than not to hear, to observe is better than to hear, to know is better than to observe, and to do better than to know. Or something like, anyone who wants to read their future just has to write their own present. The last thing you can read among all the variety of symbols and drawings on the wall is a set of random numbers and dates. However, they're really not random. Some of them refer us to the Bible, such as the inscription 13, 16 through 18, which describes the number of the beast, 666, and the inscription 2213 is a reference to the line, "I am Alpha and Omega, beginning and end, first and last." This verse is a proclamation of God's power over the world, the power that modern Templars strive to achieve. This is how the first Assassin's Creed was supposed to be released in 2007, partly mystical, but at the same time, extremely realistic. But before we move on to the next part of this video, in which we will talk about the problems associated with the release of the new Desilet game, and the huge success that befell the young development team, we remind you, if you like what we do, you can support our channel by clicking the subscribe button and putting a like under this video. This will greatly help its promotion and speed up the development of the channel. And if you want to not miss the release of new PressX videos and always keep up to date with important news, click the bell button. We promise not to occupy you with messages. Subscribe, and we continue. The first details about what exactly Assassin's Creed will become came in mid-September 2005 during the Tokyo Game Show, when GameSpot announced a Ubisoft trailer for a new game under the working title Project Assassins. From then on, nothing was known about the upcoming game until E3 in 2006. It was there that a new trailer for the game was shown, which already featured a changed and well-known name to the world today: Assassin's Creed. In addition to the trailer, players could play a demo version of Assassin at E3, and after the tests, many people reproached the developers for the unrealistic combat mechanics in the game. Users asked, what are the enemies waiting to hit? The developers had the feeling that everything else is absolutely not interesting to people. They don't care because players are only interested in the combat system. However, it was simply, technically impossible to support syncing more than 2 enemies at a time. But even with this criticism and imperfection, at E3 2006, Assassin's Creed won in the category Best Action Adventure Game and was also nominated for 3 more categories. Unfortunately, the victory and 3 nominations did not add peace of mind to the team. After all, 4 years of development, an expensive marketing campaign, and 190 people in the team who regularly work on the project, this is far from the fact that the game is guaranteed success, especially when it's a new franchise with an army of connoisseurs. Therefore, as the release date of Assassin's Creed approached, the team's nerves were running high. In the fall of 2007, it was hard not to hear about Assassin's Creed. On the eve of its release, Ubisoft's PR machine was running at full capacity. A well-thought-out marketing campaign hinted at the game's sci-fi elements and turned them into a seductive, mysterious hook. The game was actively advertised on television, along with the new PlayStation 3. The footage from the trailer interested people, as the game promised a little more than the usual story of a 12th century killer. The characters in the trailer flickered, stuttered, resembling augmented reality avatars that crashed while working. This mix of mysticism and driving action attracted users of all ages, leaving them waiting for the game. Finally, on November 13, 2007, Assassin's Creed was released on Xbox 360 and PlayStation in North America, and the following week in Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. On PC, Assassin's Creed was released a little later as a director's version only on April 8, 2008. However, before that, there was one scandalous incident. In March 2008, a month before the official release, under unclear circumstances, the full PC version of the game was leaked to the network, which anyone could download. This severely impacted the game's subsequent sales, sparking intense outrage from Ubisoft. The pirated version of Assassin's Creed sold 700,000 copies worldwide, while the legal sales amounted to only 40,000 copies. As a result of the investigation, an employee of the company was found who was allegedly responsible for the incident. In the interests of the investigation, his name was not disclosed. In total, the final budget spent by the studio on the game ranged from $15 to $20 million, but according to the publisher, sales of Assassin's Creed significantly exceeded their expectations. Immediately after its release, Assassin's Creed debuted at number 1 on the chart in terms of sales, displacing Infinity Ward's Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. Most of the first sales came from the Xbox 360, which also accounted for 67% of the game's total sales. The Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 releases of Assassin's Creed received a Platinum Award from the Entertainment and Leisure Software Publishers Association, indicating sales of at least 300,000 copies of each version within a month of release. And already on April 16, 2009, Ubisoft itself announced that the game officially sold 10 million copies. Subsequently, a limited collector's edition of the game was released in North America, which included a collectible 3-inch Altair action figure, a penny arcade comic, a mini guide to the game's mechanics and lore, and a CD bonus. Perhaps the most interesting was the bonus disc, which contained behind-the-scenes videos, developer diaries, trailers, as well as interviews with the production team and winners of the Assassin's Creed short film competition. The European limited edition of the game was not much different from the American one. It included a 12-inch Altair action figure, an art book, and a bonus disc that contained several short films and voiceover diaries from the game's developers. In addition to the game, Steelbox was released on November 13, 2007, which included the Assassin's Creed graphic novel, a bonus disc, and a certificate of authenticity. The publication was decorated with killer symbols and Animus effect symbols, and Altair was depicted on the reverse side. Merch with assassin symbols sold like hotcakes, but despite huge sales of everything you could buy related to the game, in November 2007, Assassin's Creed unexpectedly received a negative reaction. The game was so well advertised that its shortcomings turned against it. There was a repetitive mission structure, a small number of tasks, and a sci-fi element that no longer seemed mystical. This made many users indignant. The game got a little bigger than us. When we saw the hype, we thought, wow, people really want this game to be perfect, and we're still fighting to make it. This is very similar to another story, when people's own expectations become the main problem of the project for them. After all, Assassin's Creed was excellent, receiving an incredible number of awards, 22 in total, and was highlighted for almost everything, from its stunning graphics to its technical perfection. And this project deserved all those rewards. The first Assassin's Creed launched a new franchise worth $1 billion, and in addition, he created a whole cult around Templars, Assassins, and most importantly, parkour. It was the parkour movement that became one of the main factors in the popularity of Assassin's Creed. From 2004 to 2007, parkour experienced a real resurgence in pop culture. Teenagers, children, young men, and adults ran on roofs and jumped over fences, and when they had the opportunity to do it safely for their health in front of a computer screen, even in the setting of an ancient city, they willingly did what they loved in Assassin's Creed. The first part of Assassin's Creed is unique in its freedom given to the player. The game has a whole bunch of stories that the player can come up with for themselves, and they'll remain only in their head. We create our own adventures. While already in Assassin's Creed 2, the developers will surprise us with adventures, and the player will make go directly after them. The fact that Assassin's Creed will have a sequel, it finally became known in early 2008. The plot of the first part of the new game franchise was not completed and left many questions about the future fate of the main characters. Therefore, since October 2008, rumors about the development of Ubisoft's next game and a possible plot began to appear on various forums and online publications dedicated to the gaming industry. But these were just theories. As you can see, this is a long story, which we'll tell you about in the next video dedicated to the ups and downs of the Assassin's Creed series. By the way, Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time also had parkour in part, so maybe it was thanks to him that this extreme sports movement became popular. If you're interested in the history of the creation of the Colt Sand series, Prince of Persia, we remind you that we have a separate video dedicated to it on our channel. Or you can watch another video that has just appeared on your screen. That's all for today. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Please like it if you're waiting for the continuation of the Assassin's series from Ubisoft. Or write in the comments why you are not waiting. But if you like this video and are already waiting for a new one, subscribe and put a like. As always, it was PressX with you. See you soon.